Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Fletcher. I am the CEO from Workforce Solutions Rural Capital Area. We're the workforce board here in Texas that covers the 9-county area that surrounds Austin and Travis County. And today we're here to talk about manufacturing, and we're going to talk about manufacturing across Central Texas and have a roundtable with some of our manufacturers here in the area. We've got some questions we would like to address to them and just kind of get their feedback on these questions, and then just manufacturing in general, what's going on with their industry and where they see things headed in the future. So I thank each of you guys for being here today. I'd like to do some quick intros of our panelists. We have Jason Otto. Jason's the president of Mensor and the head of WSRCA's Collaboration Technology Division. He's also the chair of the Greater San Marcos Manufacturers Association. We have Mr. Steve Bowenkamp. Steve is the chair of the Georgetown Manufacturers Alliance and the board president of the Georgetown Economic Development Corporation. He spent his career in manufacturing and uses that experience as a consultant now. We have Dave Stewart. Dave is the chair of the Austin Regional Manufacturers Association. He's the vice president of operations excellence at HID Global. We have Jason Guglietti. He's president of the Greater San Marcos Partnership, representing the Colville and Hays County Economic Development Corporations. And we have Conchita Guzman. Conchita is the Business Retention and Expansion Program Manager of the Georgetown EDC. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. I appreciate your time, and we look forward to a rousing discussion around manufacturing. Our communications director gave me a line to get started with, and said, as an intro, as Mark Twain once experienced, reports on the death of manufacturing industry have been greatly exaggerated. As you guys pose your answers to our questions today, maybe kind of keep those thoughts in mind about how we convince the rest of the world that manufacturing is viable, ongoing, vital industry that's very important to our economy. So the first question I would like to pose to the group is, how has manufacturing changed in Central Texas over the past decades? And Steve, since you're immediately to my right on my as I look at all the panelists here, I'll pose that question to you first, and then we'll go around the table.
Well, I think we've gone through a couple generations of young people that haven't been exposed to manufacturing like they had been previously. When we started moving jobs overseas back in the late 80s, early 90s, and ever since, primarily to China, we had a lot of our manufacturers shifting manufacturing facilities over there and chasing the low-cost dollar regions of the world. And it used to upset me because instead of trying to fix our problems internally, getting rid of waste, using lean enterprise, whatever, we would just take the easy way out and just shut the plants down, have a bunch of unemployment, and then move the jobs overseas. And what American companies found was that China wasn't the utopia that many of them thought. Typically, it took 5 years before you even pulled a profit there. If you were in any of the high-tech industries, you had a lot of intellectual property stolen and copied, by the Chinese, which, by the way, in their culture is perfectly fine. We don't think so in the United States, but in their culture, it's perfectly fine. So what we've seen now in the last 4 years is a push to bring manufacturing back to the United States. I think that's exciting because, in America, we got wealthy by making stuff, and then reselling and selling it. And we were shifting that wealth overseas, and now we're starting to see some of it come back. So I think there's a new attention to manufacturing. There's through workforce development and other organizations out there, there's a lot more emphasis being put in front of young people in high school and college now on manufacturing as a real option for a career.
Thank you, Steve. Jason Otto, how about you?
Yep. So I've been in manufacturing for the past 24 years, so I can certainly firsthand tell you it has changed. And being part of an international company, I see both sides of that story. So we have manufacturing sites overseas as well as part of a large company, but there are still advantages to manufacturing in the United States. And certainly our strategy as WICA has been produce the products as close to where their end use is. And also that helps you service the product where the end user is. And that we've seen to be a huge advantage, being able to source and service things locally. It provides the salespeople a tool or an advantage.
Thank you, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, how about you?
I think I have to agree a lot with what Steve said, and I think we're at a point where with our younger generations, they have not been as exposed to manufacturing as they probably should be. I've been in it for 25 years, and so I came into the manufacturing discipline during the time where a lot of stuff was being offshored. And I've been through that personally myself with many years with Dell and watching us move manufacturing down to Mexico and to China. So I do agree with a lot of the comments, but I think it's, getting our young people a better understanding of how, from a career standpoint, how rewarding manufacturing can be. And I think the importance to our country that it brings is extremely important. I think we've got a great opportunity in Central Texas because we are a very attractive region for manufacturing. With the recent Tesla announcement coming into the Del Valley area, they bring a cool factor that I think we need to leverage. And I think that our young people need to see that and get excited about it, because if we don't replenish that workforce and get that interest in it, I think we're going to struggle. I think that may be the biggest detractor we have, because it's not the environment we're in, but we definitely need to develop an interest. And I think that's one of the things probably I've noticed over the last 25 years is, folks my age and a little bit older have moved on, maybe made career changes out of necessity because of some of the offshoring we went through. But, I'm a father of 3, and I would love for my kids to experience it. So I think that's the biggest thing that's probably changed in my mind as well.
Thanks, Dave. Conchita, how about you?
I think when you look at the types of skills that manufacturers are needing and looking for as they've moved more to automation, that the types of skills have changed, and also who they are competing with for that younger workforce has changed over time. And as you say, younger people are not thinking of manufacturing as top of mind as a potential career choice. So we've worked really hard with our manufacturers to get the word out that skills in manufacturing that you develop are career long, they're career making. It's not just the job that you take that's paying the highest wage per hour. So if you're competing, for example, with retail or restaurant or, and you're a manufacturer in Central Texas, you really have to educate the younger workforce on a broader and more longer term perspective of career. And I'm being terrorized by the vice president at the debate. But I think that really has been, the communication, the marketing, the education of here are the opportunities that you need to consider in manufacturing. That's longer term perspective on career. And that's kind of been the change that I've seen since I've been in economic development here in Georgetown.
Yeah.
Echoing
what she said, I think what you're really saying there is there's stability in manufacturing as an industry more so than some of the other jobs. I saw some of the chat the messages come across about, the wages not being maybe, competitive with some of the other industries, but what there is stability. And we've seen that in our region as well.
Jason Guglietti, how about you?
Sure. when I look at manufacturing over the last 20, 30 years, I think the word advanced manufacturing rises to the forefront for me in a lot of ways. That, it went from a more traditional processy to much more sophisticated in the way that products are being produced these days. The parts and what goes into these components have risen in their capabilities and their needs, and the innovation that has come into manufacturing has really changed what everybody's mentioned, the type of workforce that manufacturing needs now to be successful. You need to be very highly skilled. Yes, you can get somebody to come in off the street, certainly, and learn certain things, but as they move in that ability throughout the company, their level of sophistication becomes more important. And I think that's where universities and community colleges have really become much more front and center with manufacturers than they had in the past, especially recently, because of the innovation that's happening and the force to translate the research that's happening in those universities or at the community college level into the product to make sure that the materials and the sophistication needed is met. So I think more and more we're finding some of that is starting to bleed its way in. And then obviously what was mentioned earlier around automation and sort of factoring that in. Manufacturing is now not a huge employment driver. Yes, there's still many jobs and they're great paying jobs, but there's not as many of them as there used to be because of the way automation and lean have become now, just basic necessities now for companies, manufacturers in particular, to operate. So a couple of those two together with a lot of consolidation I've seen in the industry. I came from a part of the US that saw a ton of consolidation in the aerospace segment over time to kind of shorten up supply chains or to now make products have longer life within that one company than just being made and then having to source all your parts. So I just put that all under the guise of advanced manufacturing, kind of that shift over the last 20, 30 years from where it once was.
Thank you, Jason. So we'll move to our next question. And as several of you referenced, there's a lot of stability in manufacturing. And during COVID, we saw a lot of employers that had to shut down, had to let their people go. But we didn't see that to a great extent in manufacturing. In fact, a lot of manufacturers actually picked up and increased their business over the period. But what did you guys as a group in each of your areas experience during COVID with supply chain? And was that supply chain disrupted? Were you forced to find different suppliers or acquire your materials in a different way than you might have done in the past? And we'll start with Dave this time.
It was, I'll have to say, I think the one advantage to individuals that work with a manufacturing background or a supply chain background, and the panel probably agree with me, you kind of, it's not that you're prepared for a pandemic like we had, but supply chains by nature and operations by nature have a tendency to be pretty nimble for the most part. We very quickly were able to get essential status for our operation. And so as an example, we worked closely with the city of Austin and they had a committee that they put together to start to, how do we safely bring people back to work? We were way out in front of them on the manufacturing side. And so they were learning from us. What did you do to create a safe work environment? How did you, how were you able to get to secure the essential status you did? Supply chains were disrupted, but it cost us a little more to get product over. But the fact is we had the lanes already set up. So it's a balance between, air versus ocean. Lead times are probably the biggest thing that impacted us. Remember China was where a lot of the supply comes from in the electronics industry where I'm at. And they were 2 months ahead of us in this whole pandemic situation. So where things in March, April, May were getting kind of hot in the U.S., they were starting to come back. So for us, it was trying to find the safest and fastest way to get product back into the country. And so, we did see some disruption, but we never had shutdown issues from it. And more importantly, we were able to maintain a safe work environment for the employees. I kind of feel like, again, we were probably a little ahead of the rest of the region and other industries because I tend to think we're a little more nimble just by the nature of what we do.
Thank you, Dave. Jason Guglietti.
Yeah, I'll take it from a slightly different perspective, not running a manufacturing company, but working with the manufacturing industry to attract them to our region. The disruption really was minimal. We actually saw a tremendous increase in companies exploring Central Texas for their new supply chain logistic type company to be closer to a supplier or simply to better service their U.S. customer from the center of the country. So our pipeline and the way we measure it was actually 3 times greater than it's ever been in its history. And a big line share of that is manufacturing in the supply chain logistics space. So a ton of activity in that space, demonstrating to us that companies clearly, want to be here to service that need that is out there during and after COVID subsides. So it was telling for us certainly to see that. And really, I think just a reflection of the environment we're in right now, and that we're presenting a very strong value proposition for those type of companies to locate.
Thank you, Jason. Conchita?
Okay. I would have to echo some of what Jason said in that we've had interest in our area from distributors who are interested in being closer to their customer, more central. Especially given that we're right off of 35. And in addition to that, we've had some of our local manufacturers who were in the midst of considering expansion before COVID. So we had a little, they kind of held off for a couple of months and, just to kind of see where things were going and stabilize their workforce. But we have been back on target with working with those businesses through their expansions. And, we can't run fast enough to get it going. So I guess we've been very blessed in that sense. I couldn't speak to the manufacturer specific supply chain interruptions during COVID. But as I was reaching out to some of our manufacturers, their issues really were around stabilizing that workforce, making sure people were, getting tested and having access to testing. Some of them had to do intermittent furloughs, but have so far been able to bring everyone back. So that's kind of what I've seen over the past few months with our manufacturers.
Conchita. Jason Otto?
Sure. We had the benefit, I would say, that most of our suppliers we've got local, so we buy a significant amount of our supply and parts and stuff from local vendors, which there was not too much interruption there. The communication became a little bit difficult. One of the things we did inside of Mincer was we went to 2 separated shifts in order to increase the social distance between the employees. And so we had a Monday through Wednesday, 3-day, 12-hour shifts. And then we had a Thursday through Saturday, 3-day, 12-hour shifts. And they were totally isolated. So nobody could move from one to the other. And so that presented some communications challenges for sure. But we learned to be very efficient with it. There was we had online handoff meetings between the shifts, so everybody knew what was going on. And we seemed to not have too many interruptions with parts supplies, whether it be international or local.
Thank you, Jason. And Steve?
I can't add a whole lot more than what everybody else has said. I do know that manufacturing has always figured out a way how to get things done. And I think the working of the supply chains that companies have had, we run into some glitches along the way, but for the most part, it hasn't stopped production and shut down any major industries that we've had here, manufacturing industries. As Conchita said, what I've seen with companies is that the safety and the health of their employee base is the most important thing. And they've really worked hard at keeping people working, keeping them healthy. And, that's why I think manufacturing has come through this, not unscathed, but it's not as bad as some other industries.
Okay, thank you, Steve. So we had a question come through from one of our school districts. They asked the question, what are the two most important types of equipment or skills that school districts could be teaching kids in order to have them be prepared to enter the manufacturing industry? Steve, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes to my mind very quickly is additive manufacturing, or in other words, 3D printing. That's one thing that has really changed the manufacturing world, and we're just in its infancy stages, really. Where, for instance, let's say in the plastics industry, you have a mold, that's machined to what a product's going to end up looking like, and an injection molding machine manufacturer or a user used to order a mold. It would take 6 months to be engineered and built, and you'd ship it. Then they would have to test it. Well, it's not quite what we wanted the part to be. So then they'd have to have the mold modified at a very expensive cost, 100 grand, 50 to 100 grand at the time. Where now you could actually make a part in a day, in a lot of cases, to get it exactly what you need, and at a lot less expensive cost, to the manufacturer. So that, to me, schools can get 3D printers. They can get some that are fairly inexpensive. Some of the industrial models that I've been involved with are $1 million and up. But the cost savings and the speed to market by using additive manufacturing is a real plus to the industry.
Thanks, Steve. How about you, Dave?
I think it was discussed earlier. I think one thing that would really help is around the notion of advanced manufacturing and robotics. And I think that's something that, younger generations can relate to also. And I think that'd be very helpful. I remember, you've got some pretty good vocational programs that are out there today. But at least the ones that I've been exposed to and the ones that I quite honestly participated in when I was in high school were more geared around, it was welding, which is still very much in high demand or need, or woodworking or automotive. Those things are great. But, I can tell you just through both in what I do and the people I've talked to, automation is a key part of how we go forward and how we stay competitive in America. We're not a low-cost country. And so, manufacturing is going to have to stay on the forefront of driving the cost per box or the cost out of that thing that they're manufacturing. And a lot of it's going to be done through automation. And we need people coming out of our school districts, understanding that and drawing that connection between that discipline and manufacturing. And I think that will help give us an advantage in securing jobs here for a long time. So where you may lose some traditional roles, you gain in more advanced roles too. So there's some give and take there. I think real exciting.
Thanks, Dave. Jason Otto.
Sure. One of the skill sets that we routinely end up doing on the job training for that I think could be pushed down into some of the vocational programs is the ability to read engineering drawings and how bill of materials work. How you build up a product, basically the recipe of what goes into a product and what levels it makes sense to have service items, for instance. But the big one for me is how the bill of materials and the engineering drawings interact, and how to read an engineering drawing, what the tolerances mean, those type of things.
Thank you, Jason. Conchita?
In GIT in Georgetown, what we had done, the city of Georgetown had worked with the ISD in bringing manufacturing equipment that would typically be used in a basic manufacturing setting. As Steve said, the 3D printer, the lathe, CNC, and actually having those students be experienced and comfortable in using that equipment in the manufacturing setting. And what we have been told by the manufacturers is that it's a great advantage that, a young person can come in and have complete familiarity with that equipment. So much so that some of them are on par with students who may have gone through, say, their first year at a junior college, getting the introduction, maybe like TSTC or whatever, getting an introduction to that equipment. So I would say, having used the equipment in a classroom setting, being comfortable with it, understanding what it can do, having the safety mindset also. And then the other thing is, and I think I'm maybe echoing Dave, is the basic math skills. And you might think you don't have to say that, but I have heard this when we've done tours of our manufacturers and talked to some of the leaders in manufacturing in Georgetown, that having those basic math skills is still critical. That is still critical. So those are kind of the technical skills. Of course, on the other side, we always hear the soft skills are really important, and you just can't ever let up off of getting that in front of the students and talking to them about the soft skills.
Thanks, Conchita. Jason?
Yeah, I was just going to go there where Conchita went right there at the end. As the soft skill stuff we hear, it's funny. The technical stuff you guys well articulated, I think, is common things we hear. But on the soft skill side, it's just that basic interpersonal work ethic. Show up on time. Be there for your shift at an entry-level position. Doing some of those basic things we all think everybody should know and do doesn't happen at an entry level in manufacturing. I've heard it from probably more than any other industry. Is just to have that basic set, and then have that basic interpersonal ability to communicate. If there's a problem or something challenging, communicate that, interface with your colleagues. Again, all things we assume are basic skills, but certainly if they're not taught and reinforced for entry-level employees, it can cause more headaches. And I'm sure the guys here can echo that, and Conchita can echo that from her perspective as well, in terms of what manufacturers have to deal with for entry-level employees when you think of that cohort.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you all. Those are good answers. We had two other questions that came in. And I'll go.
Can I interject,
Steve?
Paul?
Sure.
Sorry to break in. That soft skills thing is so important in a manufacturing company, because most people, especially the young kids today, they think, well, I don't want to work on a manufacturing floor or whatever. But there's so many functional areas in a business that have to work in conjunction and collaboratively together. You've got customer service, you've got HR, you've got engineering, you've got IT, maintenance, finance, all these different functions in the business. And if you can't get along with people and work with people collaboratively, you're probably not going to fit in today's manufacturing environment. So that was a really good thing, I think, that Dave and Conchita brought up.
Thank you, Steve. We hear about soft skills and the importance of that, across the board, not just in manufacturing, but for all industries. And it's just really critical, a basic foundation that I think all of our young people and really everybody needs to know when they enter the field of work. So we had a question that I will pose to the group as a two-part question. So one is, if you're over 65, can you get into manufacturing as an entry-level employee? And two, how do we make manufacturing appeal to younger kids that are comparing it to, say, an IT job that with a starting salary of 50,000 plus? How do we make that look competitive? And is there a career path? Is there a process that we could show young people what that looks like as they would move through a career, and what a career in manufacturing could look like? And Steve, let's just start with you.
What was the first part of your question again?
If somebody was 65 or over, can they get into manufacturing?
Old guys like me is what you're saying.
Yeah, so I thought I'd start with you, Steve.
Yeah, obviously there are opportunities for people that want to work over 65 in manufacturing. In fact, prior to the COVID, a lot of companies employed people over 65. What I've read recently, though, is some of the first people that were let go or furloughed have been the older workers, and certainly that's understandable. But I think depending on your skill sets and what you offer to companies, There's certain skill sets, if they don't have them within the company, you can certainly help mentor some of the younger people to get those skill sets. So to answer the question, yeah, there are opportunities. It all depends on what you offer to these, to a manufacturing company. As far as income, it depends on what level, it depends on what particular industry the manufacturer services. But in Williamson County, for instance, 7.3% of our workforce is in manufacturing. And it's not the largest employer, but certainly 7.3% is not too shabby with all the different segments. Manufacturing ranks third in average wage, which is about $126,000. So, and that's probably including your, everybody in the organization, including executive management. But for $126,000, we rank third of all the industries here. That's not too shabby.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Dave, how about you?
Well, so that the answer to the first part of your question, I agree with Steve. Absolutely, there are opportunities for those 65 and older, and it comes down to skill. It really is. There's plenty of opportunities out there. Certainly at entry level, and age doesn't make somebody not trainable either. So I think that's also something that's important to know. And as far as the second part of that question, I think that there's, I think it's important that we get our younger folks to understand that when you come into manufacturing, there are other doors that will open up for those individuals. A lot of people that I've worked with in my past, we came into the factory, very traditional factory job, a stereotypical role. Those people are running supply chain organizations now. They're running logistics organizations now. And so some have gone into engineering disciplines. So I think what I've really loved about the career path that I've chosen is that you can kind of go and you think, well, it's assembly line and that's what I'm going to do. That's not necessarily true. I mean, and it comes down to the individual. If the individual has a desire to learn and grow, I'm partial, but I've seen it at work. There are hundreds of success stories out there of, young men and women coming into a manufacturing environment and then going off into other disciplines because of the skills that they learned in manufacturing that prepared them for the next role. It always comes down to the individual though, but yeah, and again, I'm a little partial to that, but I've seen it hundreds of times.
Thank you, Dave. Jason Otto?
Sure. We have several employees who are over 65. Some of them have been here 45 years, but nevertheless, there are certainly always opportunities in our workforce or even in support of the assembly, like they mentioned earlier, in the stockroom type, kitting and stockroom type applications, shipping and receiving. Depending on their skill sets, certainly we utilize some of our senior employees for mentoring and things like that. And the mentoring doesn't necessarily have to be technical. The mentoring can be those soft skills and things like that that were mentioned earlier. As far as appealing to the younger generation, I've said it to somebody recently that most people in grade school and in junior high don't aspire to be in manufacturing because they don't understand what manufacturing is. I think if you ask those same children, would you want to work at Tesla or SpaceX? They'd say, absolutely. And those are manufacturing jobs. So it's like we talked about, there's luster in certain names. And until they understand what happens inside some of the what I think is different is it's not a high-rise application like you see a big fancy building and you think, oh, that's a high-tech company. Our building up until 4 years ago was a metal building, free span, looked like a barn. And I know when I came and interviewed, I looked and thought, wow. I mean, I had interviewed with Dell and Applied Materials and some of the others in Austin, and I, approached this metal building. But when I got inside and met the people and the engineers and the the staff, I was blown away, and to see the things that were going on inside the walls was really exciting, and encouraged me to stay there and continue learning throughout my career.
Thank you, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Conchita?
There definitely is that cool factor to the Teslas and SpaceX. But what I've heard from some of our manufacturers also, and young people don't think about this at all, is the element of ownership. And so there are a number of manufacturers where it's an employee-owned business. And when you want to talk about then income potential and career development potential, to say that you're a part owner in what you're creating and in what you come in to do every day is not something that's talked about a lot. But you know, again, for a young person and thinking what that income potential is, it's worth considering. And I think that can compare with some of the other more attractive technology careers that a young person might be comparing to. And then the other thing is, when I've visited manufacturers, what they tell me is that the folks that they have within the business who understand the interconnectedness of how the equipment runs and works are gold to them, because those are the folks who keep things operating. And a lot of that at this point is more high technology equipment. And so again, for a young person to develop those kinds of skills is job security and definitely advancement, you know, with a higher paying salary. So I would say that, you know, there's opportunity to grow there. And then to echo Steve, what Steve was saying is that there are a lot of other entry points to a manufacturing career that's not just on the manufacturing floor. So if you're looking at, you know, the marketing or the accounting, or, you know, even looking at lean manufacturing and understanding processes, all of those aspects are ways that you can broaden your career opportunities and be able to move within the manufacturing sector.
Thank you, Conchita. Jason?
Yeah, so just picking up off of you know, Dave's comments, Jason's, Conchita's, and Steve's comments about the cool factor, I think that goes without saying, but I take it even one step further beyond just even the Tesla and SpaceX. It's any manufacturer. When you expose a young person to a manufacturing company, then they can actually see a product being made. It's mind-blowing to a kid at any age. I think it's something that they just don't know. It's purely exposure. They just don't know that everything in front of them has been made somewhere. And until they see that that product can be made right here in their backyard, something as sophisticated as any of the companies here are producing, down to the most basic thing, when they see it, I think it transforms their thinking a little bit. And when they see it in an environment that's clean and safe and rewards them financially, which all of our companies around here do that, it just opens their eyes to it. So in my mind, it's the exposure. And as they get older, I think the other selling point that I know sometimes resonates is that you can go in, you punch that clock, you go in, you produce that product, and you punch out. You don't have the baggage that 90% of us probably have when you now have to be on call or picking up a phone. No, you're done. You did your thing. You're out. You come back the next time, and guess what? You're there for that 8 hours. You're committed. Unlike a lot of other careers these days that, you know, you're working weekends, you're working evenings, you're working hours that you otherwise didn't plan on. In manufacturing, in a lot of ways, you don't have that. So certainly some positions do it. I'm sure you guys do, but you know, the other workers probably do not have that. So those two things to me really play well when you share some of that story with young folks.
Thank you, Jason. We'll move to another question.
Could I add anything to this?
Sure.
And that is that I really hope as a manufacturing community that we're looking at developing entrepreneurs, that we're looking at, you know, developing the skills of people within the manufacturing sector who ultimately would look to maybe open their own manufacturing business, making whatever it is that they're making, right? Because yes, our manufacturing sector is aging, but the survival of this country will really largely have to do with what we continue making, creating and making and selling. And I don't know how much time we invest in inspiring young people to be entrepreneurs, particularly in manufacturing. So I just want to put that out there, because that's another whole aspect of what we need to be looking at as manufacturers.
Great point. So how do we as a community support the research and development efforts of our regional manufacturers to address local needs and build products or accessibility that solves problems? And Jason Giglietti, we'll start with you.
No, I think it's just more connectivity, right, among both parties. I think it's getting the manufacturing community, the education community together, and the more we can do that. I know we've taken tremendous strides among our community to facilitate those relationships, but the more we can do that, the more we can get folks connected. I think the stronger we identify those needs and can fulfill those needs on the other side. We've just scratched the surface, honestly, for what we know is out there and what our part of Central Texas throughout this corridor will continue to see in the future. You know, we maintain tremendous business advantages for company manufacturers to locate here. So as we do that, we need to continue to double down on ensuring those relationships are serviced on both ends, and then ultimately we're providing the right intel to our education systems to service the need. So in my mind, it's a lot of just really convening groups to make it happen, and then ensuring that it's not just meetings, obviously, that it's being converted into actual outcomes. So the more we can do that, the more we can facilitate dialogues. I know Jason's part of our greater San Marcos Manufacturing Association, similar to, I'm sure you guys are as well in your regions. The more you bring them together to talk about common problems, scale resources to make it not just one company's onus, but an industry segment or others, help ensure that needs are met, not just one company, but the sector. So again, the more we can do that, the more I feel like we can be successful.
Thank you, Jason. Conchita?
Well, I would echo that, and it's a lot of what we've been trying to do in the Georgetown Manufacturers Alliance is really to, you know, kind of reach out to the broader region and you know, explore those topics that are pertinent for Georgetown manufacturers, which would be no different from other areas around automation and how we're using that to make smarter decisions, being more efficient, and then also keeping, you know, safety at the forefront. And those are probably common conversations across the board. But, you know, we're open to having the conversation with other areas other than just the manufacturers in Georgetown. And so that's a kind of an invitation to you all when we typically have a Manufacturers Alliance meeting just twice a year. We don't do it very frequently, and 2020 has kind of thrown us a curveball in even being able to do that. But you are welcome to join any of our presentations. And if you are interested, let me know, and we'll make sure to get that out to you.
Thanks, Conchita. Steve, how about you?
Well, I come from a background where I was with a company 31 years, and we spend 10% of our revenues on R&D every year. And I think back to it, you know, what really drove it? Well, it was our customers and the industries we service that drove us to innovate. Because if we didn't innovate, we died. Because if you're not doing something to solve customer problems, there's somebody coming around the corner that's going to. So I think that it's very important if somebody's looking for a job. That's one of the things I would do, is look and see, you know, what their commitment to innovation is, which drives entrepreneurialism, to Conchita's point earlier. I think that's a very important part of growth for a company is continuously coming out with new products, new innovations. And by the way, that innovation isn't always just in products, it's also in process development and manufacturing improvements as well.
Thank you, Steve. Jason Otto?
Sure. So one of the things that we do have with Greater San Marcos Manufacturers Association is we have active members from all of the local high schools, continuing education and vocational programs involved, and also the community college, ACC, and occasionally Texas State as well. And what's interesting for me is when they, just in the last 4 years or so, they passed the academies in state high schools. And so now those decisions about career paths are being made at a much younger age. They're being made in junior high. So students entering high school have to kind of decide which academy they want to be, which career path they're wanting to look at. And it's important for us as manufacturers to figure out which one they should be in to flow up into a manufacturing career. I know we've also benefited from combining with other manufacturers. So there's certain trainings that have to go on. One of the examples that comes to mind is we do a fair amount of soldering here inside of Mincer, and also Ember, which is another manufacturer here on the north side of San Marcos. So we've partnered with them in two ways. One year, we only had a few people who needed the training, so we just had their trainer from Ember who had already been trained train our employees, and then in the future years when we had a kind of a larger number, we just combined a class with Ember and got one trainer down to train both companies, and so that's where I think you can benefit from having higher numbers even though we're smaller companies by networking and sharing those resources.
Thank you, Jason. Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree with what the panel said. I think whether you're talking about R&D or you're just talking about workforce solutions, I think the key is partnering, the industry partnering with the community, the K through 12, but then also the higher ed institutions that are out there so that they understand what is it that we need. And I think we've taken some good steps this year. ACC has been fantastic to work with. One of the other things too that's available out there that we've taken advantage of at HID is TMAC, the Texas Manufacturers Assistance Center. So some of the training that Jason talked about, some of that shared resources are out there with other companies. TMAC operates off grants from the state of Texas too. So there are fantastic training opportunities out there, and we've done co-ops with other companies, smaller companies like a Samsung or AMD or somebody's probably going to have enough of their own internal resources to handle their needs. But for guys like us and smaller, we rely on the community, the resources that are out there, the junior college system, and then each other. And I think it's important to try to find where are those connections and how do you get involved in them. And I think those are also pretty important to not only from the R&D and the innovation standpoint, but also from a workforce standpoint too.
Thanks, Dave. I think we're going to have time for one more question, and then I'd like to give you guys each a minute at the end to kind of wrap up and give us your closing thoughts about what manufacturing means to Central Texas and what any thoughts you guys might have here at the end. But so the last question I'm going to ask, and I'll start with Steve this time. Steve, what role does apprenticeship play in recruiting manufacturing workers?
I think I'm going to go back just a little bit and now answer your question. One of the things I've seen since manufacturing has come back, and a year ago we're talking about how in the heck do we get people to work at our companies? There was such a demand, and yet there weren't enough workers out there to fill those open jobs. I've never seen a time in my lifetime where government, local politics, the private sector, the schools have all worked together to try and solve that problem. And I think one of the things that came up, I remember a conference I was at where I forget who it was that came in from the federal government. I think it was from the Commerce Secretary, and talking about how can we start apprenticeship programs at these schools. Years ago, there used to be apprenticeship programs all the time for people coming out of the old, what they called the trade schools. And I think we're starting to see that happening again in Central Texas, but it's just taken a while to get that rolling. And I think that plays a very big role in the future of manufacturing in Central Texas. So apprenticeship programs are very important.
Thanks, Steve. Dave?
I think the burden there is really on us within the businesses, right? So apprenticeship programs were, I guess, not as common, but they are starting to become available. We need to make sure that we take advantage of that so that we have that. And in some of your other vocational trainings, certainly in K through 12, and I remember when I was in high school, I took welding. Well, I got to go do an apprenticeship at a welding shop over on Barnett Road, right? So, but to be able to do that same thing in a manufacturing environment was not as common, and we're starting to see that more and more. But if we want to keep that, and I think that's important, we need to make sure that we step up to the plate as businesses, employers, and take advantage of that to keep that interest there and certainly keep that resource available.
Thank you, Dave. Jason Otto?
Sure. We don't necessarily have a structured apprenticeship program, but we do have and have had active internships here at Menser for many years. We currently have 5 employees who started off as summer interns in high school, either junior or senior year of high school, and it's very exciting for me to see those employees, go from a temporary part-time position into a full-time position, and now to see them starting families and buying their first homes and things, it's extremely exciting to see. And I also do have also the international experience with WICA, where they do have apprentice programs, and we've also taken advantage in recent years of master's students needing to do a project, and Menser, various departments inside of our company have utilized master's students to do a mutually beneficial project where they get to go through the process and learn about the process, and we get some deliverable that helps our business from a marketing standpoint, a financial standpoint, or whatever.
Thank you, Jason. Conchita?
So we have been working with our local manufacturers on trying to take advantage of the skill development fund grants, and but on the apprentice side, we haven't had as much interest or activity on the apprentice side. And I think one of the things is that, I don't remember who said it earlier, is that, when a company is looking at maybe going it alone and having, if they don't have enough participants for a particular class or whatever, it might not be a viable option. But what I think would be important to the viability of having some sort of apprentice program is a collaborative approach of multiple companies working together. And so it might be an apprentice program where, a worker is not just being trained to do something at a particular company, but it's a common skill across what a number of manufacturers may need, and it's in high demand and not available. So, I guess if I had my wish over here in Georgetown, is that to be able to put, get something like that going on the apprentice side would be wonderful. In the meantime, I will still continue to diligently work on the skill development grant side to try to get some of our manufacturers on board with that. We do have a couple of them, but again, to see that more broadly rolled out would be wonderful. The city and the chamber have worked closely together with other stakeholders in the community on the chamber's Workforce Development Alliance. And that brings together, some of our folks from the ISD, from the Workforce Commission, as well as some of our manufacturers, and Steve is a regular part of that. And so, we're looking at those training opportunities, be it apprenticeship or skill development grants, across even broader than strictly manufacturing. And I think it's just going to take a broader perspective, thinking more broadly about it. on how we can implement and interest businesses in offering themselves up as a place of training for apprenticeship programs. I just haven't seen I haven't seen a heightened level of interest where I am, and I don't know if that's because we need to do a better job. I'm not sort of putting it out there as anybody in particular, but a better job of getting the word out, marketing, and making it doable. That it's not an insurmountable, administrative task to be able to have an apprentice program.
Thanks, Conchita. Jason?
Yeah, I think just echoing off some of what was already said, but really the need to structure the program if it is to be successful. I think Jason probably has the closest example that I'm familiar with companies, especially abroad, that those countries come with very structured apprentice programs and very clear paths for their students early on, and can lay out a very predictable path for those folks on where they'll then fit into the company down the road. We're just not there. We don't have that type of structure set up. So it's very difficult to sort of lay out that path outside of what would be an internship opportunity or something like that. So I think until there's that structure that's integrated into the school system and with the manufacturing community together, it's not really going to be as viable of a program as it can be. So I do think apprenticeships are tremendous if they're done right, but I think it's still early to make a judgment call yet on its success.
Thank you, Jason. So we've got about enough time to do about a 30-second wrap up for each of you guys, and I'll if you want to go a little over, that's fine. But just your thoughts on manufacturing and why it's important to Central Texas, and I'll start with Conchita.
Yeah, just to to echo what I said before, is really looking at that entrepreneurial aspect and encouraging who's going to be our future manufacturers. Either the succession planning of our manufacturers that we currently have, or new businesses that are bringing technology and the wow factor, the cool factor that kids are interested in, and what younger people are looking for in terms of their career aspirations. So focusing on that aspect of growth.
Thanks, Conchita. Jason Guglietti?
Sure. I think manufacturing is going to continue to see tremendous value in operating, relocating, or expanding in Central Texas. I mean, we branded the corridor the Innovation Corridor for a reason. There's tremendous amount of activity and innovation happening here, not just because of the university, but because of the manufacturing companies and principal that are here innovating, creating new patent activity to support new product lines and activities that folks don't recognize enough. And I think couple that with the fact we bring affordability, low cost, we bring a workforce, and we bring a desirable location in the central part of the United States. Manufacturing is going to continue to double down and come our direction, exploiting the workforce that's here, bringing new products to market, and leveraging the tremendous assets that sit here in Central Texas. So I think it's going to be just a tremendous outlook for the next 5 to 10 years in the manufacturing boom that will happen here in Central Texas.
Thanks, Jason. Dave?
Yeah, I think manufacturing to me it's important to Central Texas because we've talked about it earlier. It's stable, and it provides great opportunities for everybody in the community, regardless of whether you're talking about folks coming out of the high schools or junior colleges or universities. The other thing too that I think it's also important to understand is when you do draw companies into Central Texas is some talk about. I think Tesla alone is going to add 5,000 jobs, but that's just to the auto manufacturing plant. For every one job they bring, they're going to bring 5 more in the ecosystem that has to come with it to support that industry. So it's the backbone of the economy, and I think it's critical. We all benefit from this, whether you're in manufacturing or not. Other sectors will benefit from it, and we're the foundation for that. I think that's very exciting, and why we need to stay ahead of the game in Central Texas and keep drawing these people in.
Thanks, Dave. Jason Otto?
Sure. So it's interesting. I was doing a little bit of research, and I remember it being like the biggest news story in the San Antonio, Austin area when the Toyota plant was coming in 2006. And again, it was the same thing that he just mentioned, that Dave just mentioned. It's not just the Toyota plant that's coming. It's the demand of those type of manufacturers means they want their parts in 24 to 48 hours, which means logistically they have to have suppliers with stock very, very close, which means in the same region. So I think we're going to see a lot of the similar effects with Tesla for sure. And let's face it, we're in one of the highest growth corridors in the country. And I think it's exciting to hear Jason Giulietti talking about manufacturing being one of the fastest growing sectors or industries in this high growth area. So I think there's a really bright future for manufacturing in Central Texas. I think, one of the things that we haven't mentioned yet is the quality of life, around. So there's very few places you can go where you have 45-minute access to 2 major international airports. That's a huge advantage for us. You have I-35 and 130 access to I-10. I mean, you have, lots of infrastructure, shipping logistics advantages, and major universities in the area with programs that benefit manufacturing. So it's really just a perfect storm, I would say, for manufacturing in our region.
Thank you, Jason. And Steve, we'll let you have the last word.
Okay, I can't disagree with what anybody said. And the beauty of Texas is that we have a can-do attitude, and that is the backbone of anything we do here, whether it's manufacturing or anything else. And I remember, I'll share a story that goes back even further than Toyota that Jason mentioned. Back in 1990, I had heard rumors that Applied Materials was going to move from their manufacturing from Silicon Valley down to Austin. So I called my colleague, fellow colleague out in the semiconductor corridor out there, and I said, "Hey, have you heard anything about Applied moving to Central Texas?" He calls me back. He says, "Oh, no." He said, they're just opening a sales office. I started laughing because whenever companies say we're just opening a sales office, what they're doing is scoping out real estate to build a plant. When they moved here, that's when Austin exploded. So you can probably blame Applied Materials for all the traffic problems we have today. Because what happened was all these peripheral businesses that supported them out in Silicon Valley had to be closer to them here in Central Texas, and that's what happened. It just exploded with high tech in Central Texas. The #1 semiconductor tool manufacturer in the world is located, in the Austin area. So I think there's a lot of excitement going on here. It adds a lot of value to communities. And just to give you an idea, the GDP in Williamson County last year was 10.1%. That's the total value of goods and services, produced. The largest contributor to that was manufacturing. And I think as we continue to grow manufacturing in the Central Texas region, it's going to be nothing but a positive for this part of Texas.
Thank you, Steve. I'll close by saying thank you to everyone that joined us today to hear about manufacturing. I want to thank all 5 of our panelists for spending an hour with us, sharing their expertise. Thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you to Dr. Cara DiMartini-Ryan for helping get the call set up and getting everybody lined up for this, and our chief storyteller, Brian Hernandez, for spreading the word about this event and helping get the crowd we had on the call today. We had a lot of questions we didn't get to, but we'll try to address those questions and get some answers back out to everyone that joined. So thank you guys very much for joining, and y'all have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.